Why is this such a big deal?
They have let this misunderstanding fester.
He said that the government cannot agree with the premise of this motion.
But we have to ask whether in 2024 this should be relooked.
Hey everybody, thank you for joining us on another episode of Help Desk. Today we have a special episode for you guys. It's something a little bit different. The first thing that's different that you might have noticed, we have a brand new set. It's been kindly furnished by Scanteak, so thank you to our friends over at Scanteak for this beautiful furniture that we have here. The other new thing is that we're going to try something a little bit different this week. We're not going to do our usual episode. We're not going to do the usual thing of answering audience submitted questions and giving advice on those things. Instead, this episode will be all about helping you guys understand what is going on in Singapore's political scene. You see, pretty much every month of the year, our MPs meet in Parliament to discuss items of national importance. This includes things like laws that we might adopt, or it could be issues that have captured the public's attention. And to help us make sense of the things going on in Parliament, we have with us a social political commentator who, according to Wikipedia, is known for attracting controversy for his outspoken views on Facebook. In 2021, he actually pivoted away from, quote, serious stuff, and he transitioned into what he is calling a lifestyle sexy influencer. He is, of course, the former nominated Member of Parliament, Calvin Cheng. Thank you so much for joining us, Calvin.
Thank you for having me. Hello.
How is that lifestyle sexy influencer career going for you?
I hope it's going well. I mean, I'm trying to post other things other than social politics, but unfortunately that's my brand, so it's not so easy to pivot. Maybe we could do more of it here in Mothership next time as well.
Do you agree with that Wikipedia characterization of someone who attracts controversy?
I think controversy is a controversial term, right? Yeah. So controversy is only controversy if people find it controversial. So things that I find are pretty straightforward. If some segment of society finds it controversial, then they find it controversial.
Okay, yeah. And you were a nominated Member of Parliament. Can you tell us a bit about that?
So an NMP is just an appointed Member of Parliament. So I think it is modeled pretty much on the upper house in the United Kingdom. Over there is the House of Lords. They have a bicameral system with a unicameral system. So there are 9 non-partisan members of Parliament that are appointed for various contributions to society. If you look at the criteria, a lot of it is, again, very similar to how members of the House of Lords are appointed. Yeah. And I think it's good to have non-elected members of Parliament. An NMP is very different from an NCMP. An NCMP is also not elected, but they are not elected only because they were the best losers. Yeah. Right? Whereas an NMP never contested an election. We are appointed by the President of Singapore.
And overall, what was the experience like, if you had to describe it in a few words?
I think when I became NMP, I was too young. So I think I was a bit scared back then, because especially since back then, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew was still alive. And to me, back then, he was extremely intimidating. I mean, he was a larger-than-life figure, right? Yeah. And at the age of 32 or 33, I was quite wet behind the ears. And also, I didn't serve the full 24 months because on the 21-month mark, a general election was called. Yeah. So it was a very interesting experience, but I think I probably would have gotten more out of it now as an older, more experienced person.
So I think for future episodes, maybe we can find out a bit more of the stories that you had in your time in Parliament. Sure. But for this episode, let's talk a bit about what happened in the Parliament sitting that just passed. So the first thing let's talk about, it's been all over the news for the past few weeks. It is the NTUC income thing. So maybe just a quick one-line intro or context to what is going on. In July, the German financial services provider Allianz announced that it was planning to buy a majority stake in income insurance for about 2.2 billion Singapore dollars. And since that announcement, there's been lots said about this, people who disagree with the move. Maybe can you help us understand why is this such a big deal? Like, why do people care so much about income insurance?
So I think I've spoken about this in a previous podcast with Mothership. But now, I think 2 weeks have passed. There are two things I think are causing people to react about this more emotionally.
Yeah.
Firstly, there are people like Professor Tommy Cole who are framing this in a more emotional framework. He says that there is a social mission to NTUC income, and secondly, that income shouldn't be sold to a foreign company. So I think most importantly, there is this argument that the social mission of income will be diluted or maybe even completely dropped if it's acquired by a foreign company.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that's one. And then there are also former CEOs of income and NTUC enterprise who have put more factual arguments forward about the financial aspects of the deal. But I think that if you take a step back, most of it is there's an emotional reaction to the first point where people are worried about the social mission of income.
Yeah, that social mission has its roots back in the 70s when NTUC Income was set up. And I guess it was set up for the purpose of providing insurance for people who couldn't afford it, right? Which was most of society at the time, right? But as I understand it, that has changed quite a bit. Is that correct?
So I think if you cut through all the noise, there are two main reasons for this objection, especially for the emotional reaction to the sale. Firstly, it's about the social mission. So this social mission in 1970, when back then NTUC Income was set up, was that the insurance industry in Singapore back then was very undeveloped.
Yeah.
And there was a need for a local insurer to provide cost-effective, affordable insurance policies to Singaporeans. And also, back then in 1970, Singapore wasn't a wealthy country. So the state of Singapore, the government of Singapore wasn't able to provide as comprehensive a healthcare system as we are able to do now. So the question about the social mission is something that is very emotive to people because they feel that, there's a nationally owned insurer that has this mission to help needy Singaporeans.
Yeah.
But I would like everyone to take a step back and understand a couple of things. Firstly, things have changed, right? Now it's 2024. It's not 1970. And over 40 private insurers now exist in Singapore. The insurance market is no longer underdeveloped. So Singaporeans have a lot of choice. And income doesn't provide the cheapest insurance across the board to needy Singaporeans like it did back in 1970.
Yeah.
We have to also ask whether this social mission then is even relevant now, right? Whether there is this need to be fulfilled by a locally owned insurer. But a more important point is this: if there are a certain demographic in Singapore that requires insurance that isn't covered by private insurers, this role shouldn't be played by a private insurer. And income, make no mistake, income is still a private insurer. Even if it's a social enterprise, they are still a private insurer. The insurer of last resort always has to be the state. And unlike in 1970, where Singapore didn't have the ability to be a strong insurer of last resort, the Singapore government now does have the ability to be the insurer of last resort. What this means is that if there is a need for a certain group of Singaporeans to be covered by insurance policies that are affordable, that cannot otherwise be provided by the private market, the responsibility shouldn't be thrown to a private enterprise, be it foreign or local, but the role should be taken over by the government of Singapore instead. And we do have a national insurance scheme, which is MediShield Life. And if we think that MediShield Life isn't comprehensive enough, then this should be expanded.
Yeah.
So this is a very important discussion to be had, but it's a completely different discussion altogether from whether income should remain in local hands and whether it should continue having a social mission. That's point number one.
Yeah.
The second reason why there is a lot of emotional outpour is that I believe that there is a misunderstanding that income is owned by the government of Singapore.
Yeah.
That somehow NTUC is owned by the government of Singapore and therefore by Singaporeans. This is not true, because income is owned by NTUC Enterprise, and NTUC Enterprise is owned by the unions. The unions are not the government of Singapore. Unionized workers only cover 30% of the workforce in Singapore, and unionized workers are not comprised merely of Singaporeans, but also of foreigners, Singaporean PRs and foreigners. So there is no argument whatsoever that NTUC, and therefore income, is owned by government of Singapore or by Singaporeans.
I mean, I guess it's almost impossible to divorce thinking about income from, maybe not say the government, but from the PAP party, right?
Yeah, so as I said in a Facebook post, that we have to lay the blame squarely on the PAP because they have let this misunderstanding fester that the NTUC is the PAP and the NTUC is the government. It might be a completely different discussion altogether, but the relationship is known as tripartism, which was set up in the early days of Singapore, where the government, the unions, and the businesses have a very close relationship to prevent protests and strikes disrupting normal life in Singapore, disrupting businesses in Singapore. So we have a very unique way of solving industrial relation problems. But we have to ask whether in 2024, whether this should be relooked, because things have now changed between 2024 and 1965 or in the 60s when this relationship was set up. And because of this very close relationship and the double hatting, people have this misunderstanding that the NTUC is the government, which is why they think that income is being backed by the government and it's safe because of the government. This is a complete misunderstanding because the NTUC is not the government of Singapore.
There's a few things I just wanted to touch on before we talk about what the discussion in Parliament about NTUC, about this NTUC issue was. The first is that, we talk about NTUC's, or rather income's social mission or social good. Just some examples for our viewers to take note of or to be reminded of. In 2014, NTUC introduced insurance coverage for people with Down syndrome. The year before that, they became the first insurer in Singapore to provide insurance coverage specially designed for children and young people with autism. So these are some of the social good kind of things that people are looking for.
So this comes down to my point. If there are Singaporeans that should be insured that are not being insured by private insurers, why should this responsibility fall on a private insurer, even one like NTUC Income with a social mission?
Yeah.
The responsibility for people with Down syndrome, with people with kids with autism that are not being insured properly by the private insurers, this responsibility has to fall on the government of Singapore.
Okay.
It should be the government who is stepping in to make sure that these people's healthcare needs are being covered.
Let's talk about Parliament a little bit, like how this issue was discussed in Parliament. I know in your Facebook post you said that it shouldn't be the government answering for this, but I guess there were many questions fielded in Parliament about it. Most of the questions, they were about the impact of the affordability of Income's products now that it's being sold to Allianz. The second one is about The other group of questions were about income, social purpose, and social mission that we've talked about a little bit. With regards to affordability, maybe can you explain the concern here? Why would people be concerned about the affordability of incomes products now that it's being sold?
So I think the bigger issue is the affordability of healthcare itself, right? So I think the worry amongst the population is not about insurance, but the affordability of healthcare itself. They want to make sure that there's affordable insurance because they want to know that their healthcare needs are covered.
Yeah.
But again, these needs need to be covered by the state of Singapore. It cannot fall to private insurers to ensure that the most vulnerable Singaporeans are insured. So the government has to ask itself, why is there so much concern about the affordability of insurance policies? It's because people are worried about the affordability of healthcare itself.
Yeah, and to be fair, Alvin Tan, Minister of State for Culture, Community and Youth, he did reiterate the government's commitment to preserving the affordability and quality of goods and services for Singaporeans. He cited the pledging of $100 million over 10 years from 2021 to drive social mobility among low income and to support seniors' well-being. So I guess in answering that question, Minister of State Alvin Tan kind of did address that concern. He also said that NTUC has promised to keep premiums affordable despite the sale. Is that a thing is that possible for NTUC to do?
I think as important shareholders, they will definitely have a voice on the board. It also comes down to the exact details of the sale and purchase agreement. And of course, most importantly, and that's why the government was answering questions, all insurance companies still have to be regulated by the Monetary Authority of Singapore. So the government does have some levers in order to make sure that insurance companies abide by the contracts and the insurance policies that have been signed from years ago.
Yeah. And Chee Hong Tat, the Minister for Transport, who's also Second Minister for Finance, he sits on the board of the Monetary Authority of Singapore. He did speak about that, about how MAS is looking at the sale and making sure that everything is above board. So it looks like the sale will go through despite,
We do not know whether the sale will go through because this has to be subject to all the shareholders. It has to be subject to the Monetary Authority of Singapore's approval as well. But I think one important thing is that I hope that through all the noise and thunder, it doesn't give the impression to foreigners that Singapore is turning nativist, that it's going to put off foreigners and foreign companies from investing in Singapore.
Okay, I think the next thing that we want to talk about in today's episode from the most recent Parliament sitting is the discussion, shall we say, about electoral boundaries. So just a bit of background. NCMPs Hazel Paul and Leong Man Wai tabled a motion calling on the government to review the process by which electoral boundaries are determined. And they said this was in order to increase transparency and fairness of the electoral boundary review process for all political parties.
Okay, I think to cut through all the noise, and because the opposition MPs cannot say this outright because then it's going to cause a huge controversy. I'm not an elected member of parliament, so I think I can say it.
Yeah, thank you.
Is that there is a nagging suspicion amongst the opposition and opposition members, opposition supporters, that there is gerrymandering going on.
Yeah.
So all of this about the EBRC, review of the process, blah, 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 it comes down to them thinking, rightly or wrongly, that there is gerrymandering.
Yeah.
So I think let's address the issue head on, right?
Do you think there is gerrymandering?
So let's not beat around the bush. I think before we even answer that question, we have to understand what gerrymandering is. So, and in order to understand what gerrymandering is, we need to understand an academic field called psephology.
Okay.
Psephology is the study of voting trends and voting patterns. And it's only if you understand psephology, voting trends and voting patterns, then can you gerrymander. What's gerrymandering? Gerrymandering is when borders of constituencies are drawn to give a certain political party an advantage in voting such that you make it probable, if not for certain, that the constituency will vote a certain way. So in order for this to happen, you need psephology. You need to know which demographics vote in what ways, which geographies work in what ways, and therefore you need data. So then there are two very important points here. Firstly, as Minister Chan Soon Seng has said, the EBRC has no access to voting statistics from previous elections. So that means that they do not have the psephological basis to gerrymander. But I would say that cynics would not believe this. So let's again, grab the bull by its horns, address the elephant in the room, and say that to the most cynical opposition supporters, the most cynical opposition members, they do not believe that the EBRC has no access to voting statistics.
Yeah.
And therefore they are able to gerrymander. Which comes out to the second most important prerequisite for gerrymandering. In order to gerrymander, you need to have demographics that vote a certain way clumped together in a way where you could draw the constituencies such that that constituency is very likely to vote a certain way.
Yeah.
What do I mean by that? So in places such as the US, the UK, certain races tend to live in the same place. They are racial enclaves. So to generalize, in the US, African Americans tend to vote Democrat. White rural Americans tend to vote Republican. So if you know that an area is mostly black people, it's most likely that that particular geographical area, the neighborhood, would vote Democrat if it's mostly black people.
Yeah.
So if you draw that constituency out in that way that is all black people, it's very likely that that particular constituency would vote Democrat at the next election. So knowing this, I would like to then point out that it is very, very difficult to then gerrymander in Singapore based on these principles.
Okay.
Because Singapore has no racial enclaves. The whole reason of the ethnic integration policy is that every HDB block reflects the racial diversity of Singapore. There are no racial enclaves, there are no religious enclaves, and there are not even slums where you can say that this area is all poor people. And if I draw the boundaries in a certain way, then they are bound to vote in that particular fashion. Knowing that this is what gerrymandering is, right? I would then ask you, right, as a thought experiment, if we were to be totally cynical and say that there is the EBRC isn't neutral, it is neutral, I have full faith that it is neutral, and you are in charge of the EBRC, how could you possibly gerrymander?
Yeah.
How could you possibly carve out constituencies in Singapore that you are confident will either vote for the opposition or vote for the PAP?
Yeah.
Right? So we know that there are no racial enclaves. So let's do it by socio-economics. Let's say you say, okay, let's carve out this area. It's all one or two bedroom HDB flats.
Yeah.
You say, okay, because there are 1 or 2 HDB flats, I think that you're more likely to vote the opposition. But are you sure? That cannot be, because we know that a lot of lower SES or rather socioeconomic status people are staunch supporters of the PAP precisely because of the help and subsidies that the government has given them.
Yeah.
Let's go the other way, right? So you decided, okay, this is a rich area. Let's put all the rich people together. Let's say I carve out a constituency only in Tanglin and Orchard. And we have this very naive prediction that they're going to vote the PAP because they are rich.
Yeah.
Are you sure? Because from my experience, and I know this for sure, a lot of my younger, wealthier friends actually lean towards the opposition.
Okay.
Because they want checks and balances. They are more liberal. They went to school in the West. So even if their parents are pro-establishment, they are not. So again, I'm going to ask you,
Yeah.
given all that I've said, is there any practical way of gerrymandering?
Yeah.
So if I'm going to say, let's let the Workers' Party, let Pritam Singh control the EBRC, how is he going to gerrymander? There is no demographic that you are certain. There's no constituency. There are no clumps of demographics that you can carve out that you know is going to vote in a certain way.
Okay, let me respond to that with 2 points. I think it's worth saying that Minister Chan Chun Sing kind of pointed out exactly what you just spoke about. You know, to read out what he said in Parliament, he said, in Singapore, every electoral division is more or less a microcosm of our nation. This is a result of our urban planning where we do not want to have racial or religious enclaves in Singapore, nor do we have a rural-urban divide. Exactly what you said earlier. On that first point about the EBRC being neutral, I think the argument that was put forward in Parliament was about the fact that the PM secretary sits on the EBRC, and Hazel Paul and Pritam Singh both asked if it was possible for it to be chaired instead by a judge. So that's the first point that they made on that. The second point about how to draw the boundaries, right? Pritam Singh gave 3 examples, or he gave a few examples in Parliament of what he saw as, you know, perhaps having a hint of gerrymandering, right? The first one was in 1991 when an opposition candidate in Braddell Heights SMC gained close to 48% of the vote. And then in the next election, that SMC was incorporated into Marine Parade GRC. The second one he gave was in 2011, the second example, 2011 when a Workers' Party candidate, Yi Zhenjong, almost won Joo Chiat as SMC. He lost by just 388 votes. And then by the next election, that SMC had been merged into Marine Parade GRC. And then he said these examples cannot be constant.
Okay, so I think the second point is more important than the first, because as
Yeah.
I said, let's cut through noise, and all these things about neutral, not neutral, judge, not judge, comes down to the fact that people are cynical,
Yeah.
that they think there is gerrymandering. And I've pointed out that even if you were to be completely biased, how are you going to gerrymander, right? Because of the way of the demographics are spread out across Singapore, unlike in other countries. We do not have particular enclaves that can be carved out that you know is going to vote a certain way. Now, as to the second point, let's use another real life example. And again, this needs some understanding of psephology, right? Elections are won by swing voters. And one reason why gerrymandering works in the West is because most people tend to vote consistently a certain way given their demographic. They are not swing voters.
Yeah.
And given that we do not have this sort of demographic spread, swing voters are extremely important. So let's say now we have alternate GRC, and you say that to be completely cynical, let's say we want to gerrymander. We want to carve out alternate GRC such that it doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
We give part of it to Marine Parade, we give the east to East Coast, We give parts of it to Bukit Batoks, parts of it to Ang Mo Kio. How can you be sure that this is going to cause not only that the voters would vote for the PAP, but instead of just losing one GRC, you're going to end up losing 3 GRCs because you have carved out people who have voted a certain way to become swing voters in 3 GRCs instead of putting them into 1 GRC. And like one, I think it was Raj Thomas, the NMP has said, people are not stupid. If you're going to do things so obviously and carve things out and divide them, they get upset, they get angry. They are more likely to vote the other way. And because now elections are so close, they are won by these swing voters, by dividing a unit GRC up into 3, instead of saving 1 GRC, you're going to lose 3 GRCs, right? So I think it's extremely simplistic to think that by just carving things out in a certain way, given that we do not have clumps of demographics, is going to ensure that the electorate in the new constituency votes in a certain way. The only way to do this is to make the entire electorate disappear, and that's not possible. So people like to talk about Cheng San GRC. Cheng San GRC's name changed, but that doesn't mean that the people changed. They are all still there. It's just been drawn in a different way. So the people who are going to vote opposition are still going to be voting opposition. The people who are going to be voting the PAP are still going to be voting the PAP, but the swing voters have now been dispersed. So I don't think the whole concept of gerrymandering is relevant to Singapore because of the way our population is heterogeneously dispersed around the entire island. You cannot say that Yishun is going to vote a certain way, West Coast is going to vote a certain way, East Coast is going to vote a certain way. This is not true. If you look at previous trends, there's this, again, very simplistic understanding that the East is pro-opposition and the West is pro-PAP. But I do not think that this is true because of the nature of the people, because Yishunites are not any different from West Coast people. West Coast people are not any different from East Coast people. We are not different just because I cross the road, right? So it is because of the personalities that are running in these constituencies. So Jurong GRC was very strong because of President Taman, because he's very popular amongst his people. But now that he has left, will Jurong continue being a PAP stronghold? We are not sure. Right? Because Jurong people are not a different species from East Coast people. So what is the conclusion of this? The conclusion of this is that because Singapore is the way that Singapore is planned, is that the demographics are spread out across the entire island. I believe that every general election is fought on national issues. Singapore is one big constituency. Our needs are almost the same. We are the same people. People are spread out. So every general election are fought on national issues. And the PAP are going to lose constituencies when the opposition puts up a very charismatic candidate that the people like and they feel that should be given a chance, given that I think, again, homogeneously, Singaporeans want check and balances. And if the opposition can put up a credible candidate, I think any constituency is open to giving this person a chance.
I think we saw that in the last election with Professor James.
Because again, local issues do not work. So unlike in the UK, in the US, where some parts like coastal areas have certain issues that are different from, so for example, issues in Brighton are very different from issues in Manchester, very different from issues in Birmingham. But are the issues in Yishun very different from the issues in Tampines, issues in West Coast? We are such a small country. So again, this works to the disadvantage of the PAP.
Yeah.
Because on the local issues, they fight on local issues. So they try to fight on local issues. So they say, hey, if you vote for me, I'm going to give you a shopping center. But why do I care?
Yeah.
I mean, Orchard Road is 20 minutes away. Or even if I cross the road from Ang Mo Kio GRC to East Coast GRC or to Marine Parade GRC,
Yeah.
I also have a shopping center there.
Yeah.
It doesn't make a difference to me. So then I'm going to vote on a national issue. I don't care if you give me a swimming pool. I don't care if you give me another shopping center. I can take the MRT and in 15 minutes I'm at a shopping center.
Yeah.
Because my concerns are going to be the same as everyone else's concern all across the island.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this issue was, maybe to round out our discussion, right? This issue was very quickly shut down, I would say. Minister Chan Chun Seng, he said that the government cannot agree with the premise of this motion as it suggested that the current boundary review process is not fair and rigged. He insisted that the process is meant to serve the interests of Singaporeans and not the interests of political parties. I think that that's all that we have time for today. We'll have Calvin on in the future to discuss more issues with regards to politics.
Thank you.
Perhaps the National Day rally, so you guys can look forward to that. So thank you so much for joining me today, Calvin. Yeah, thank you.
And I like your scarf a lot.
Oh, you're a big fan of Liverpool?
Big fan.
What do you think of the furniture, by the way? What do you think of the furniture?
Well,
Can you give a
I've
review?
had Scanteak furniture before, and I think they are very good quality.
Yeah, I think it's great quality as well.
Yeah.
So thank you so much to Scanteak
Thank you.
again. And thank you so much to you guys for tuning in. We'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.